Get out, and if you show your face here again, the door stays locked. Imagine being the pampered fiancé of a ruthless mafia don, expecting him to force a waitress to her knees. Instead, he looks at you like dead meat and banishes you to the streets. Adrian Vico just threw away a massive political alliance because a server with no last name whispered a ghost's name in his ear. The war is on, and the corrupt senator is going down.
Let us step into this dining room together, you and I, right at the edge of absolute disaster. Who do you think you are? The question cuts through the silence of 40 hardened men who have suddenly stopped breathing. Expensive wine dripped steadily chin of a motionless waitress. Hung through from her. Across from her sits Charlotte Banks, a senator's daughter drowning in entitlement, demanding this worker kneel. The waitress simply refuses. Beside Charlotte, the city's most brutal syndicate, who commands most brutal syndicate, gently lowers his glass. We learn something vital in spaces like this. Never mistake a quiet room for a safe one. Before we watch this powder keg explode, take a second to subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. It is always fascinating to see where you all tuned in from. But let us return to the wreckage at the table. I said the lamb, Adrian. Charlotte's tone drips with a manufactured sweetness, the kind formulated to corrode a man's soul drop by drop. For 23 straight minutes, she has worn a hollow, painted smile, the exact mask she weaponizes at charity galas to ruin the lives of the working class. But right now, that porcelain facade is fracturing. When Adrian calmly points out she actually ordered the duck, Charlotte erupts. She demands to know if changing her mind violates his rigid underworld laws, her voice sharp with mockery. It reveals a quiet truth about human nature. When you relentlessly test a patient's soul, you cannot be surprised the day they simply stop caring. Adrian starves her of a response, taking a slow draw of red wine, watching his future bride with the total apathy of a man watching a storm destroy an empty house. At 37, the violent gravity of the syndicate has already turned his hair to ash. 8 years ago, his father was executed in this exact booth. From the blood of that night, Adrian inherited a massive empire, the cold shipping docks, and an endless registry of enemies. He also inherited this suffocating arrangement, a marriage contract he only signed to ease his mother's dying breaths. He is a prisoner of his own devotion. It serves as a painful warning for all of us. Loyalty is a noble anchor, but when given blindly, that same anchor will pull you straight to the bottom of the ocean. Adrian traded his freedom for his mother's peace, shackling himself to a partner who repulsed him. Adrian, Charlotte snaps, her voice brittle. He exhales a long, heavy breath, confessing he has endured her endless complaints for 4 years, and no longer knows how to block the noise. Her features harden into stone. She flashes her 4-carat ring in a sterile transaction handled by his assistant because Adrian could not care less. She screams that her politician father considers him a shadow, not a real man. Adrian absorbs the insult like water on rock, nodding in casual agreement. His refusal to engage infuriates her even more. There is profound wisdom in his absolute indifference. Arguing with a fool only proves there are 2 of them. Sometimes you just let the fire burn itself out. 2 tables away, a hardened enforcer winces, quickly dropping his eyes to pretend the disrespect never happened. The veteran staff recognizes the dark weather of a Charlotte Banks meltdown. They track her rising cruelty like a hurricane making landfall. Stage 2 is already flooding the room, and Stage 3 always demands a sacrifice. Out of this heavy tension, a lone waitress materializes beside the table. She moves like a phantom, her hands quietly folded, entirely immune to the venomous radiation pouring from the wealthy bride. In a soft, unbattered tone, she simply asks if they require anything else. It is a stunning display of quiet strength. We often forget this simple truth. Real power never needs to scream to be heard. It stands firm and still while the fragile egos shatter around it. Charlotte narrows her eyes, unable to place the faint rhythm of the worker's accent. She is an aristocrat who calculates your exact financial worth by the shape of your vowels. But this woman remains unreadable, and for a tyrant, anything that cannot be categorized is a direct threat. Charlotte snaps, demanding the lamb. The waitress explains the kitchen fires are dead. Charlotte sneers, asking if she requested a speech. The response is a flat, professional no. Charlotte leans in, eager to watch the working-class girl fracture under pressure. Yet the waitress, with her pale, unblinking green eyes, remains rooted to the floor. Her poise teaches us something vital. When a toxic person tries to drag you into their private hell, your sharpest weapon is unshakable peace. Stick with me here, because this is where the psychology gets fascinating. The waitress remains motionless, her hands neatly folded. Charlotte hisses an order to leave, but the girl is made of stone. She simply offers another polite apology regarding the lamb. Trembling with ego, Charlotte demands a name. Maeve, comes the soft reply. The senator's daughter weaponizes the single name, mocking her lack of a family title, practically begging Adrian to agree that the girl is pathetic. Adrian refuses to even lift his gaze from the table. He just tells Charlotte to eat her duck. That single drop of indifference is the match that ignites the room. You see, the hardest thing for a deeply insecure person to handle is an audience that refuses to flinch. Stay grounded, and they will destroy themselves. We all carry invisible wounds, but Charlotte uses hers as a blade. She has spent decades curating a museum of petty grievances, keeping a bitter tally of every time she felt inadequate in the long shadow of her political family. That toxic history ferments inside her. Tonight, facing a loveless syndicate marriage in just 6 weeks, sitting across from a man who looks at her with absolute disgust, she needs a victim. She locks her furious gaze on Maeve, loudly declaring she no longer desires the lamb anyway. It is a textbook display of displaced anger. The lesson is as old as time. Unhealed wounds will eventually infect everyone around you. If you refuse to confront your own internal darkness, you will inevitably end up bleeding on the innocent people who never even held the knife. Charlotte pushes the plate away, declaring she does not want the food at all. She only wants to watch Maeve beg for forgiveness. Maeve maintains a steady, flat tone, quietly asking what exactly requires an apology. The question drives Charlotte to the brink of madness. For one fleeting second, the waitress shifts her pale eyes to Adrian. The mob boss remains carved from marble, staring deep into his glass, utterly detached from the psychological violence beside him. Maeve offers a measured, professional apology, but Charlotte is starving for dominance. Leaning in with terrifying cruelty, she commands the worker to drop to her knees. The entire restaurant stops breathing, but making someone else crawl will never stitch together the broken, bleeding pieces of your own hollow heart. Let us shift our gaze to the shadows for a moment. An aging syndicate leader from Philadelphia, a ghost who has buried rivals and outlived 4 wives, ignores the screaming woman. His cold eyes are fixed purely on Adrian, judging exactly how the young heir handles this chaos. Back in the center of the storm, Maeve keeps her hands perfectly laced together. With a voice like steady rain, she informs Charlotte she will absolutely not be kneeling. Charlotte begins to physically vibrate with rage, screeching about obedience and knowing your place. Maeve anchors herself and delivers a chillingly calm refusal. And then gravity fails. A heavy crystal glass is suddenly airborne. True respect is never demanded through tantrums. It is forged entirely by your composure when the world shatters around you. Charlotte is governed entirely by reckless ego, her hands moving far faster than her conscience. She snatches her crystal goblet and hurls it directly at the server's face before the thought even fully registers. The impact is a sickening crack. Crystal explodes against Maeve's cheekbone, sending sharp fragments raining onto the polished marble. Dark red wine bleeds rapidly down her white collar, painting a morbid picture of a fatal wound. Yet, this is where the dynamic shifts. The waitress does not gasp. She does not raise a hand to her injured face. She simply stands there, wine dripping from her jaw, radiating an energy so profoundly empty that seasoned killers in the room suddenly cold. The most terrifying response to blind aggression is absolute, unbreakable silence. We are about to uncover the truth, so stay with me. In a fraction of a second, the meek illusion of Maeve dissolves. Her innocent features harden into a lifeless, predatory glare. A face the most dangerous men in this room recognize only from classified syndicate files. Over by the mahogany bar, a massive enforcer institutes his coat and powers off his phone, sensing the air pressure drop. Trembling from her violent outburst, Charlotte foolishly doubles down, demanding the girl grovel. Maeve simply denies her. When Charlotte threatens to ruin her life, Maeve finally speaks, her voice ringing out like a heavy iron bell. Who do you think you are? The lesson is chillingly clear. Never assume the quietest person in the room is not the deadliest wolf. Watch closely how the power dynamic flips in this scene. Maeve stares the spoiled heiress dead in the eyes, stripping away her unearned authority. Charlotte is completely exposed, stammering weak defenses about her impending mafia marriage and her senator father. But Maeve operates on an entirely different level. She methodically dismantles Charlotte, pointing out the arrogance of a woman who throws tantrums and whine with equal measure. Maeve already holds the cards. Knowing the names and the political ties, yet she delivers a freezing reality check that shatters the illusion. It serves as a stark reminder for all of us. No amount of wealth or borrowed power can buy genuine class, nor can it protect you from a person who has absolutely nothing left to lose in this world. Charlotte stands entirely paralyzed, her jaw practically hitting the floor. For the first time in her heavily insulated life, the terrifying reality sets in. She just crossed a fatal line inside a room, breathing with lethal mafia enforcers. This is the exact kind of psychological trauma that will leave her sweating at 3 a.m. for decades. Desperate, she begs Adrian to punish the waitress, but the crime boss simply raises his head with a microscopic, chilling smirk. In a brutal twist, he informs his fiancée that Maeve does not work for his syndicate. She works for the restaurant, and the restaurant works for Charlotte. He washes his hands of her entirely. We can take a simple truth from this cold rejection. Never assume the people you think are standing behind you will actually catch you when your arrogance finally pushes you over the edge. You and I should take a closer look at what unfolds next, because the narrative tension spikes dramatically. Adrian strides out of the restaurant, completely ignoring the older associate who attempts a rare moment of warmth by calling him. The boss has already forgotten his trembling fiancée. He steps out into the biting October wind, entirely numb to the cold. He issues a quiet command to Luca, demanding to know what his dead father was hiding. Standing by the getaway car, Luca offers a silent, heavy stare, knowing this investigation will tear their syndicate apart. The truth we find here is incredibly simple. No matter how much dirt you pile on top of a broken family secret, it will inevitably claw its way back to the surface. Adrian slides into the suffocating darkness of the back seat, muttering that Maeve is located in Greenpoint. Luca, his most trusted right hand, is already 10 steps ahead. He had Marco shadow her, refusing to let his boss sit exposed without a tactical advantage. For exactly 4 seconds, Adrian closes his eyes. It is the only tiny window this hardened criminal allows himself to actually feel the weight of the betrayal. Then his eyes snap open, demanding every shred of information on the name Cassian Voss. A heavy silence floods the car, broken only by the wailing sirens of a restless city bleeding through the tinted glass. This moment reminds us of a fragile reality. We build massive, unyielding walls to survive our trauma. But sometimes that absolute control is nothing more than a beautiful illusion. The suffocating tension shatters when Luca reveals that Cassian Voss has been officially dead since 2004. Adrian shoots back instantly, noting his father burned those specific syndicate files 2 years later. He never realized exactly whose ghost the old Don was trying so desperately to bury. When Luca asks what the waitress actually said, Adrian confesses it was just that one single name, but her delivery was calculated and precise. She knew the exact psychological damage it would inflict. She did not even flinch when the mask of the mafia boss slipped. She has been waiting in the dark for a very long time, preparing for this exact strike. This sequence teaches a terrifying but honest lesson. Patience born from deep, unhealed emotional pain is without a doubt the most dangerous weapon a human soul can ever forge. Idling at a red light, Luca grips the steering wheel, completely refusing to meet his boss in the rearview mirror. He states the brutal facts out loud. If this Cassian is actually alive, and if Maeve shares his bloodline, then the former leader lied to the entire organization. A mafia boss only hides a family tree that deeply to conceal a massive, unforgivable sin. Adrian coldly replies that he understands the blood debt, and he intends to rip it out by the roots. The light turns green, and Luca hammers the gas. Miles away, the camera would show Maeve shaking violently. Perched on the cold edge of her bathtub with a damp rag pressed to her bruised face, she clutches her phone, terrified of the storm she just summoned. It is a harsh reminder for all of us. We can run as fast and as far as we want, but the past always knows exactly where to find us. Picture the raw isolation of this scene. Maeve sits alone in her cramped, unlit bathroom at 11:10, scrubbing expensive spilled wine from her uniform. Curiously, she is not agonizing over the 40 armed mobsters who were ready to kill her just hours ago. Instead, her mind is completely anchored to the sound of Adrian crushing a glass barehanded and that microscopic 4-second emotional shutdown. For 11 months, she observed this syndicate leader. She poured his coffee, mapped his habits, and convinced herself she understood the monster entirely. The profound lesson hidden in her shock is one we often forget. When you spend all your time studying a monster from the shadows, it is incredibly easy to forget that he still has a beating, highly unpredictable human heart trapped inside his chest. For nearly a year, Maeve studied the way he commanded his brutal enforcers and entirely ignored his suffocating fiancée. She watched him carry the heavy, quiet burden of a man locked inside his own mind. She had braced herself for every possible violent reaction when she finally dropped her grandfather's name. But she was totally unprepared for the raw, naked vulnerability that washed over his eyes in that split second. Life has a funny way of teaching us this exact truth. We can spend years building armor for a massive war, but we are never truly ready to witness another human being deep, unfiltered brokenness. Suddenly, the dead quiet of her apartment, an unknown number glows on the screen. A raspy voice claims to be a friend of her grandfather, sending her blood turning to ice. Panic sets in as she darts to the window, scanning the empty street below. All she spots is a random idling taxi and a solitary shadow stretched out beneath a flickering street lamp. She demands to know who is calling, but the gravelly voice cuts her off immediately. He insists his identity does not matter, but warns her that dropping that specific name has awakened some incredibly dangerous ghosts. The old guard is beginning to panic, and they possess a ruthlessness that even a modern boss like Adrian cannot shield her from. The stranger asks if Adrian heard her clearly. When she confirms it, he delivers a chilling verdict. The point of no return has been crossed. It is a brutal but necessary life lesson. Once you strike a match in a room filled with dark secrets, you simply cannot unsee the absolute chaos the fire illuminates. Maeve attempts to project strength, flatly refusing to take blind orders from a voice on the phone. But the stranger softens, offering a piece of forgotten history. He tells her that her grandfather used to call him Felix, a simple nickname to replace a complicated past. Felix confesses he made a vow to the old man. If Maeve ever stepped into the fire, he would be the one pulling her out. He admits to spending 2 agonizing years searching for her, only to realize she was hiding right under the syndicate's nose. He pleads with her not to waste the few hours of darkness they have left. His loyalty proves that true, unselfish devotion actually outlives the grave. Exhausted, she slumps against the cold porcelain and asks for the next move. Felix quietly instructs her that her only job tonight is to close her eyes and survive. Felix calmly lays out a high-scale plan. He orders her to vanish from her apartment before sunrise and move directly to a secure location, without breathing a word to anyone. Then, he drops a crucial psychological warning about Adrian. He cautions that while the young boss is not exactly her sworn enemy, he is certainly not a friend. You and I can likely recognize that agonizing gray area where you cannot tell who is safe to trust, but for a hunted woman with a price on her head, that gray area is the most lethal place on earth. Felix texts her the exact coordinates of a safe house, commanding her to memorize the numbers and immediately burn the digital trail. She stares at the bright screen in the dark, violently carving the escape route into her exhausted memory. With trembling hands, she deletes the message and speaks into the heavy silence of the room, asking the ghost of her grandfather what kind of absolute madness he left behind. The pacing here is brilliant, because exactly 40 seconds later, her phone vibrates again. Another blocked number appears. There is no text, no voice, just a single, terrifying notification that glows briefly before wiping itself from the device. A cold knot twists in her stomach. She realizes someone else is actively hunting her, and this predator is definitely not Felix. She kills the lights instantly. Meanwhile, miles away, Adrian sits paralyzed in his luxury sedan right outside, staring up at her window. This haunting parallel teaches us a final truth. We rarely fear the dark itself. We fear the terrible, breathing secrets hiding inside it. Let us examine this scene together, you and I. In the freezing front seat, Luca remains entirely silent, embodying the cold reality of syndicate loyalty. The understanding that true devotion often means burying your own curiosity. In the back, Adrian stews over Maeve's terrifying precision. For 11 months, she moved through his territory like a shadow, calculating every single breath. Luca suggests her habit of piracy was mere paranoia, but Adrian knows better. The silence in the car grows heavy, suffocating, until Luca finally asks what Cassian Voss meant to the old Don. Adrian simply stares at her illuminated window, realizing a profound truth. We all carry the weight of our past, but some phantoms refuse to stay buried. They pull up a chair and demand to be fed. The solitary light in Maeve's window cuts through the darkness like a beacon of unresolved trauma. Adrian begins to unravel the mythology of his father, a man who survived the underworld by adhering to one isolating command: never make a friend. The life lesson here is as brutal as it is timeless. Whenever you let someone into your heart, you are simply handing your enemies a loaded weapon. Survival in this brutal world demands a soul made of ice, yet Cassian Voss was the singular crack in his father's armor. Adrian confesses he had never even heard the man's name until he stumbled upon a secured drawer in the study on the day the old Don passed away. When Luca asks what secrets lay inside, Adrian admits his own powerlessness. He had begged to shatter the lock, desperate for answers. The dying Don offered his son a heavy piece of wisdom, whispering that some burdens are not meant to be carried until the tragic hour arrives to unlock them. It is a powerful truth for all of us. You simply cannot force the universe to reveal its secrets before you are truly prepared to understand them. 2 hours after those words, the boss was dead, leaving that rusted drawer sealed for 8 long years. Adrian confesses he spent nearly a decade lying to himself, dismissing the mystery as the paranoia of a fading criminal. Then, the apartment light above them suddenly extinguishes. In that pitch-black moment, the truth strikes Adrian like a physical blow. The lockbox was never empty. He realizes Maeve herself is the living key. She orchestrated every interaction to reach this exact night. Stick with me as we unpack the psychology here. As the car slowly rolls away, Adrian's mind races to decipher her strategy. Why would a woman who spent 11 months mastering her shadows suddenly drop a name that could dismantle his empire just 6 weeks before a strategic syndicate wedding? He visualizes Maeve standing there, wine staining her shirt, completely paralyzed. We all know the dangerous things panic can force us to do. Honestly, we have all been there. She clearly never intended to expose her hand tonight. It was Charlotte throwing that glass that shattered her carefully constructed composure. The forbidden name slipped out in a moment of pure shock, proving that even the most calculated plans can unravel in a second. A tiny spark had just ignited a massive powder keg. Luca grips the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turn bone white, muttering that Charlotte always accelerates the chaos. Then, Adrian detonates the conversation entirely by declaring the strategic wedding is off. There is zero hesitation in his voice. This is the profound moment a man realizes you cannot sacrifice your own existence simply to appease the expectations of others. It is a debt that will eventually bankrupt your soul. Luca immediately warns him that Senator Banks will unleash a political and violent storm over this broken promise. Yet, Adrian remains perfectly still, a statue carved out of cold resolve. He quietly notes that the senator will soon face nightmares far worse than a canceled matrimonial alliance. The marriage was only ever an illusion of safety, a broken shield. Sinking deeply into the dark leather seats, Adrian transforms from a reactive victim into a calculating architect of war. He orders Luca to strip the history books down to the studs. He wants every hidden document tied to Cassian Voss prior to 2004, alongside the Jersey warehouse tax records and the forgotten furnace logs. Most critically, he demands the identity of the man who dared to look his father in the eyes and lie about the Boston syndicate burning to ashes. The lesson remains absolute. You can never build a stable future upon a rotting foundation of deception. When Luca quietly asks how they should handle the girl upstairs, Adrian merely tells him to let her sleep. He watches her window fade into the distance, fully aware her vengeance is a seed planted in toxic soil. Adrian whispers into the freezing night that he intends to deliver the devastating truth to her himself. 3 stories above the street, Maeve stands like a statue in her darkened apartment, pressing her palm against the freezing plaster as the engine noise fades. She regulates her breathing with chilling precision. This is a woman forged by survival. She had tracked 2 distinct vehicles arriving under the cover of night. One appeared briefly before vanishing, while the other anchored itself deeply within the shadows. This duality carries a frightening truth: we are rarely watched by only one pair of eyes. She recalls Felix warning her about a breed of men so utterly devoid of humanity that even a powerful crime boss like Adrian Vico would be useless against the violence they bring. We are about to uncover the psychological engine that drives her every move. Maeve's mind drifts back to her grandfather, who offered a profound piece of wisdom. He taught her that true loyalty is measured in patient silence, never in loud promises. From a distance, a man waiting to murder you and a man waiting to protect you share the exact same silhouette. However, a predator vibrates with a hungry restlessness, while a protector maintains a terrifying stillness. We must always judge people by the quality of their waiting. The black sedan under the street lamp possessed that exact chilling immobility. Lowering her hand from the wall, she walks into the pitch-black kitchen. She feels no fear at all, only the massive gravity of the cycle of violence she has just awakened. Maeve operates with a terrifying patience, treating her grandfather's rules like sacred scripture. The irony here is beautifully tragic. The mysterious locked drawer that has consumed Adrian's entire life is resting in an office a mere 8 blocks away. More importantly, she holds the invisible key. She has had those numbers carved into her memory since she was 14 years old. Life often teaches us that the most devastating weapon is simply knowing exactly when to strike. Now, she silently debates whether Adrian has earned the right to witness the sins of his father. She leaves the verdict to the morning sun. Meanwhile, down on the freezing pavement, a syndicate enforcer tightly grips a metal thermos. His orders are absolute: stare at her window until dawn and ensure nobody breaches that door. You and I are going to look at this together. The cold night crawls toward 12:37 when Marco's phone suddenly illuminates the dark car. A message arrives from an untraceable number, delivering pure, concentrated dread. She already knows you are there. Imagine the terror of realizing the prey you are stalking has been hunting you the entire time. Absolute nightmare fuel. It is a vital lesson in never underestimating quiet people. Marco freezes, his eyes locked on the blackened window above, before frantically dialing Luca. Minutes later, the phone rings in Adrian's study. The crime boss is wide awake, dissecting his father's corrupt financial ledgers. He answers instantly, bracing for the impact of those 4 chilling words. The message echoes in his mind, followed by 2 seconds of dead air. He asks if Maeve sent it, but Luca confesses they are entirely in the dark. The phantom number erased its own existence the moment Marco attempted to return the call. It might be Maeve, but the alternative is far more terrifying. What if a third, unseen player is sitting in the shadows, watching the watchers? It is a stark warning that no matter your power, there is always a more dangerous predator circling. Adrian feels a chill settle in his chest. If a rival faction is monitoring this woman, they are standing on the edge of an all-out syndicate war. Learning Marco has zero backup, Adrian deploys 2 more enforcers in an unmarked sedan. Nobody breathes near that building until he gives the command. Let us look closely at this final image, because this is where the true nature of vengeance reveals itself. Adrian orders his man to photograph the phantom text, delete the original file, and then destroy the camera itself. Ending the call, he sits paralyzed inside his cavernous study. He stares blindly at the towering stacks of old syndicate documents. Over the last hour, he found exactly 3 mentions of the name Cassian Voss. Yet somebody had taken a razor blade and meticulously carved the name out of the heavy paper, leaving behind hollow rectangular wounds. Adrian knows it was his father. You can never truly erase past by simply cutting it away. The empty spaces always scream the loudest. His father spent hours dissecting a man's legacy, and the truth is finally bleeding through. Adrian's fingers wrap around a freezing coffee mug, setting it down with a hollow thud that echoes the emptiness in his chest. Picture the scene. His father, a hardened syndicate boss, possessed a love reserved solely for his son. But in the suffocating world of the mafia, affection is rarely shown through warm embraces. Instead, on the night Adrian turned 18, stumbling through the door with trembling hands coated in another man's blood, his father delivered a crushing revelation. Sitting at this very desk, eyes deadened to the brutality, he said, "Adrian, you are the only good thing I ever made." He watered a seed of guilt with his own hands. It reminds us that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who leave the deepest, most permanent scars. We need to unpack what that moment meant. Adrian understood this was no gentle bedtime story. It was a chilling warning from a man begging his son not to inherit his hollow, monstrous soul. Yet, in a devastating display of toxic masculinity, that same father looked him dead in the eye and lied about a Boston fire, locking the truth in a hidden drawer. Fast forward to the present, and Adrian has 4 armed guards watching the one woman who holds the key to these syndicate lies. Knowing she is plotting her next move, he finally calls his Aunt Rosa, a woman he has avoided for 3 years. She answers with a groggy edge, but she is a ruthless 68-year-old survivor. Life teaches us very quickly that the painful truths we try to ignore are exactly what will eventually destroy us. Today, you and I are going to unpack the psychology of survival in this brutal underworld. Aunt Rosa outlived the men around her, not with brute force, but by being the most lethal mastermind in the room, all while wearing the camouflage of a sweet neighborhood grandmother. She walked away from the family business 8 years ago when Adrian's father died, hiding out in a quiet brownstone to prune her tomatoes. But when Adrian asks for the absolute truth and drops the name Cassian Voss, the vendetta truly kicks into gear. The silence on the line becomes agonizingly thick. Rosa never goes quiet. It is a profound reminder that no matter how carefully you curate your new life, your darkest history will always find its way to your front door. Rosa was a woman who could dominate an entire room simply by withholding her words. So when the phone remains dead for 8 agonizing seconds, Adrian realizes he has just triggered a dormant landmine. She finally exhales, demanding to know where he heard that cursed name. Adrian pushes back, explaining that a woman just threw it in his face tonight. The line grows dangerously quiet before Rosa asks for a description. "Green eyes, dark hair, 30 years old," he replies. In an instant, her calculated facade shatters. She never raises her voice, but her tone becomes utterly lethal, ordering him to shut his mouth on an open line. It is a harsh, immediate reminder that the blind spots we fail to acknowledge are the exact things that can dismantle our lives in a single second. Have you ever received a late-night call that completely freezes the blood in your veins? Rosa commands Adrian to reach her house before the sun rises, explicitly warning him to leave his trusted right-hand man, Luca, out of this entirely. She reveals that this toxic secret predates his very existence. For the first time, Adrian hears genuine, rattling fear in the voice of a woman who once ruled a crime family. He asks if she is safe, but the 4 massive guards outside suddenly feel like paper shields. The truth is, safety is a mere illusion when the ghosts of your family's violence come knocking. We inevitably find ourselves paying the steepest emotional prices for parental mistakes our parents thought they had successfully buried in the past. Her words linger in the room like toxic smoke settling over a battlefield. Rosa whispers that this mysterious woman holds knowledge no one outside the syndicate should possess. Adrian softly agrees, admitting that while she is locked down for the night, tomorrow will unleash absolute chaos. Then, Rosa's voice fractures as she delivers a crushing blow. His father actually loved this Cassian figure more than his own flesh and blood. In this brutal underworld, true loyalty demands a staggering toll, and it clearly ripped his father's soul to shreds. Adrian hangs up, staring into the dark expanse of the ceiling as he sips his bitter coffee, plunging back into his family's records. Sometimes, the heaviest debts we carry in this life are the ones paid in complete, suffocating silence. Let us shift our focus across the city, where Maeve snaps awake at exactly 5:14 in the morning, long before any alarm. She operates like a finely tuned machine, forcing her body to submit to strict survivalist orders. Lying in the pitch-black room, she reads the silence exactly as her grandfather taught her. There is normal quiet, and then there is the suffocating silence of a predator holding its breath. She slips from the bed, dressing in dark layers and flat shoes designed for sprinting. She grabs a prepared bag filled with cash and a burner phone, having waited months for her violent history to catch up. True survival is rarely about the conflict itself. It is about the silent, disciplined preparation you maintain when absolutely no one is watching. She drops 2 more deeply symbolic items into her bag. The first is a mysterious key to a lock she has never seen, and the second is a folded note she has been too terrified to read for 2 years. Glancing out the window, she watches a 4th dark sedan roll up to join the 3 already staking out her building. The threat is multiplying, yet she remains completely stoic. She calmly walks into the kitchen to brew a brutally strong cup of coffee. As the bitter liquid burns down her throat, she weighs her next critical move. Should she trust the address Felix provided, or march directly into the den of the syndicate prince himself? The greatest struggle we face is rarely whether we should take action, but determining exactly which dangerous fire we must walk into first. Felix had explicitly warned her that his loyalty was still divided. But in this moment, Maeve is pulled back to a defining memory with her grandfather in Providence. She was only 12, yet he handed her a profound lesson on the cycle of violence. When the syndicate closes in, your most vital move is not finding a hiding place. It is deciding who receives your trust first. The moment you speak, you expose your entire psychological game plan, and you cannot take those words back. He taught her that the Vico crime family owed them a massive blood debt that no financial sum could erase. She stares at her empty mug, feeling the gravity of her choices. Trust is a terrifying currency to spend, but eventually, we all must gamble everything we have in order to truly survive. Maeve powers on her burner and types a message to a classified number she committed to memory long ago. She demands an audience with the syndicate boss today, refusing to deal with any mid-level soldiers. Exactly 17 seconds later, the screen glows. That rapid response confirms someone is sitting in the dark right outside, monitoring her existence. The reply is a single word asking where to meet. She dictates the Huron coffee shop at 8 in the morning, and they agree. Before she vanishes, she approaches her kitchen drawer, reaching into the very back. It reminds us that it is deeply human to instinctively bury the artifacts that hurt us. Yet those are exactly what we need to uncover to finally heal. Her fingertips brush against a worn envelope holding the key to this vendetta. Inside that fragile envelope rests a single black and white photograph from a bygone era. It captures two men in their 30s, leaning against a vintage car, frozen in genuine laughter just a fraction of a second before the shutter clicked. Maeve knows one face it intimately, while the other is theoretically a stranger. Yet, she instantly recognizes that sharp, unforgiving jawline from watching him across a dining table every Thursday. On the reverse side, her grandfather penned a simple note. New Jersey, August, 1987. The very last good summer. She stares at the faded ink, crushed by the immense weight of stolen time. You and I both know that memories are often just ghosts trapped on paper, haunting us with golden moments we are powerless to ever get back. Maeve secures the envelope in her bag, but she completely ignores the front door. Instead, she slips up to the roof, moving like a phantom across the architecture before descending a rusted fire escape into a blind alley. The 4 syndicate cars remain out front, entirely unaware that their prey has vanished into the morning mist. Miles away, Adrian pulls up to the Huron coffee shop at 7:52. He fed his trusted lieutenant, Luca, a brilliantly crafted half-truth about visiting his aunt. He understands that what he is walking into today shatters the boundaries of mere danger. When we examine this deeply, we see that the truth is often just a masterfully constructed lie we tell to protect the very people we claim to love from the collateral damage of our own lives. Guys, grab your snacks because this mafia drama is off the charts. Adrian's absolutely reeling from the massive bombshell Rosa just dropped on him. He takes a ghost car, one of those off-the-books rides he uses, and ups up in a dark corner of a coffee shop. Right at 8 a.m., Maeve walks in, and boom. Plot twist. Adrian spots her fresh clothes and realizes she already packed her bags to ghost him, with or without this meeting. It's a harsh life lesson, my friends. You aren't always the main character in someone else's survival game. She was ready to bolt. The vendetta is brewing, and Adrian's finally realizing he's just a pawn in her high-stakes escape plan. Now watch how cold Maeve is. She scopes out every single person in the room before locking eyes with our mob boss. No fake tough guy swagger, just pure, deadly focus. She sits down, bruised up from the absolute chaos earlier, and stares right through his soul. Adrian tries to flex, telling her his guy was watching her from the fire escape since 5 in the morning. Does she panic? Nope. She just calmly admits she forgot to check the building next door. And here's a brutal life lesson for few. Even the sharpest players can miss a blind spot. And in the mafia world, one tiny slip-up can cost you your life. But Maeve's ice cold, completely unfazed by the fact that a literal hitman was tracking her every move. Stick with me here, because this is where the tension skyrockets. Adrian points out she crossed 2 literal rooftops to stay hidden. Absolute ninja moves. They're just sitting there, totally ignoring the normal people drinking lattice around them. Then Adrian drops a massive bomb. He knows about the hidden photograph. Maeve snaps into defense mode, but Adrian reveals his aunt spilled the tea. The granddad kept one single photo from 1987, the ultimate proof of a deadly partnership. It's wild how a single piece of paper can hold enough power to destroy empires, which is a wild lesson about how the past never truly stays buried. This one crusty old picture is the only evidence tying their 2 massive crime families together. The drama's absolutely peaking right now. Adrian tells her the photo is the ultimate test. If she brought it, she wants a deal. Maeve's shocked his aunt knows so much, but Adrian says the time for mob secrets is over. Then he drops the lore. His dad and her granddad weren't just boss and soldier, they were absolute equals for over 2 decades. Imagine finding out your dad had a whole secret life you knew nothing about. It's a serious lesson that you never truly know what the people closest to you are hiding. Anyway, back in 2003, Maeve's granddad found a super shady file on Senator Banks, a secret so toxic that the top dogs put a massive target on his back. Now the explosive truth is finally sitting right out in the open. This is where we get the craziest blood pact ever. Adrian reveals his dad faked the granddad's death and gave him a totally new identity. Kept that secret to the actual grave. But before vanishing, they made a hardcore mafia vow. Maeve's trying to play it cool, but you can tell she's sweating. She asks what the promise was. Adrian looks her dead in the eye and says, if that dirty politician's file ever came back to life, their two crime families would go to war side by side. Honestly, the real lesson here is about true loyalty. It's not just sending a text or some cash. It's about standing back to back in the absolute worst crossfire imaginable. The Vico and Voss syndicates are officially tied together by blood and bullets. Can you guys picture this? Normal people are drinking lattes, while these two are literally activating a decades-old mob treaty. Maeve looks at Adrian and points out his dad's dead, asking if he's going to take up the mantle. Adrian's sitting there realizing his entire life is about to turn into a war zone. He admits he doesn't even know what the dark secret is or what the senator is hiding. But here's the absolute kicker. In the Vico family, a promise is basically a loaded gun. It teaches us a huge lesson about integrity. When you give your word, you have to be ready to back it up with everything you have. He's stepping up to honor a ghost's vow. And you just know the streets are about to run red with revenge. Oh man, Adrian isn't holding back anymore. He tells her his dad never bluffed, and then he calls Maeve out completely. He knows she took that fake waitress job almost a year ago just to stalk him. Nobody pulls an undercover stunt like that without some major dark motives. Then he drops the wildest question yet. What's this corrupt senator so terrified of that he literally forced his own daughter to sleep with Adrian just to spy on him? Maeve totally pales. She realizes the arranged marriage was a trap all along. The lesson is brutal here. Guys, people will use their power. Adrian casually drops the bombshell that the senator has known her, granddad, was alive this entire time. This vendetta's getting insanely deep. Adrian realizes the corrupt senator has been secretly hunting Maeve's family for 20 solid years. Planting Charlotte in Adrian's bed was the ultimate evil genius move to keep him totally blind to the mafia war happening right under his nose. Maeve's absolutely furious. Realizing the politician knew her granddad was being protected by the Vico family the whole time. Her mind is blown by the sheer scale of the betrayal. You know, it's a hard life lesson that your enemies will smile in your face while plotting your downfall behind your back. All that innocence Maeve had? Totally gone. The senator used a fake engagement just to keep a sniper scope aimed right at Adrian's heart. Are you guys seeing how twisted this is? Maeve points out the senator just wanted to see if Adrian inherited the real mafia power, and in just 6 weeks Adrian was going to marry a literal enemy spy. He was walking straight into a slaughterhouse without a clue, until Maeve accidentally dropped a dead man's name the night before. Now for the ultimate plot twist. Maeve reaches into her bag and slides an old envelope across the table like it's a grenade ready to blow. She reveals her granddad isn't dead at all. He's 81 years old, hiding out, and he memorized every single word of that highly illegal document. It's a crazy lesson that knowledge is the ultimate weapon. And right now, her granddad is a walking nuke. Maeve's spilling everything now. She admits her granddad sent her into the city 2 years ago like a sleeper agent. He planned out every single step she took to stay off the radar. But last night ruined the whole plan, and there's no taking back a fired bullet. She looks Adrian dead in the eye and challenges him, asking if he actually has his dad's ruthless mobster blood. Adrian tries to play it tough, but Maeve calls his bluff. She tells him his dad would have ripped that envelope open instantly. That right there is a lesson in taking action. You cannot lead an empire if you hesitate. Adrian finally snaps out of it, rips open the seal, and pulls out the vintage photo of their relatives, chilling in New Jersey. The emotions are running so high right now. Adrian looks at the old handwriting and gets totally choked up seeing his dad looking so genuinely happy. Maeve tells him it was the very last summer before the massive gang war popped off and the blood started flowing. Sometimes the hardest life lesson is that peace is fragile and everything can turn into a nightmare overnight. But just as things get soft, Maeve flips the switch back to ice-cold survival mode. She drops the craziest intel yet. The dirty senator got a phone call bright and early, and within an hour, 2 unknown hitmen parked outside her apartment like absolute vultures. Adrian is totally paralyzed. The enemies are already making their move on the chessboard. Suddenly, a brand new player enters the game. Adrian's freaking out, demanding to know if she's sure about the hitmen. Maeve casually mentions some guy named Felix warned her. Adrian is super confused, but it turns out Felix is an old-school mafia ghost who has been protecting her from the shadows this whole time. He's the mystery man who tipped off Adrian's top muscle last night. Why? To test our boy Adrian. Felix wanted to see if Adrian had the raw instincts to run the family. It's a solid lesson, guys. People are always watching how you handle pressure. Adrian locked down the entire block in record time, proving to the old guard that he's an absolute beast worthy of the deadly Vico family crown. This ending is going to leave you absolutely speechless. Maeve hits him with the ultimate compliment. The old-timer said Adrian actually beat his dad's response time by a whole minute. Adrian lets out this dark little laugh, finally feeling like a true mob boss. But the victory lap is instantly ruined. His phone buzzes, and it's a text from the spy fiancée, Charlotte. The message is pure nightmare fuel. Her dad knows where Maeve is. The lesson here? Never get too comfortable, because your enemies strike exactly when you let your guard down. Adrian slams the phone down and orders an immediate evacuation. Maeve doesn't even hesitate. She's practically out the door. The absolute panic is real, and the hunt is officially on. Picture the sensory overload of this exact moment. Sirens are tearing through the city, and while a normal person would freeze, Maeve remains perfectly still. She was forged in the fire, translating absolute terror into brutal clinical efficiency. Adrian watches her and immediately understands her psychology because he wears the exact same armor constructed by the Mafia. He sees that her grandfather subjected her to immense conditioning to make her this sharp. Yanking her toward his stealth vehicle, Adrian drops a devastating revelation. His ex-fiancée, Charlotte, just betrayed them. The syndicate boss Banks orchestrated this trap 20 minutes ago. No matter how fast you run, no matter how fast you run, you can never truly outpace a master manipulator's shadow. Let us examine the mechanics of betrayal. Maeve understands the grim reality of a man like Banks. He is a predator who never reveals his hand until the cold steel is already pressed against your temple. So why, she asks, would his fiercely loyal, heavily pampered daughter suddenly turn against him? Adrian unlocks the idling getaway vehicle and reveals the anatomy of a vendetta. The previous night, Banks completely sacrificed Charlotte, dismantling her elite, high-society wedding without a second thought. Adrian knows his former lover's psychology perfectly. She is not just angry. She is a venomous serpent uncoiling in the dark, craving absolute ruin. She is perfectly willing to watch her father's empire turn to ash. It serves as a stark reminder that blind loyalty is a fragile illusion, one that shatters the moment the knife finds your back. Adrian grasps that Charlotte has awakened to her true status as a disposable pawn on her father's rotting chessboard. He jerks the steering wheel, throwing the heavy sedan through the city streets to sever their tether to the pursuers. At a red light, with the engine snarling like a cornered beast, he commands Felix to get Luca on the line immediately. The creeping shadows outside belong to Banks, and the tension is suffocating. Beside him, Maeve produces a cheap burner phone and begins typing with frantic precision. Her expression is carved from marble, devoid of emotion, yet her jaw betrays a silent storm of terror and wrath. We must remember that the individuals who appear the most unbreakable are often fighting the most devastating wars inside their own minds. Adrian observes the agonizing mental toll it takes on Maeve to bottle up her rising panic. As she sends her message, Adrian demands to know where her legendary grandfather is hiding. Maeve simply laughs, a harsh sound devoid of humor. For 22 years, her grandfather has existed as a phantom, evading federal raids and the armed private militias financed by banks. She refuses to gamble 2 decades of meticulous survival on the whim of Adrian's scorned former lover. She admits she respects the ancient vows his father made, but she simply does not trust Adrian yet. It is a profound reminder that true trust is never a gift freely given. It is a rare currency forged and earned only in the absolute darkest of human moments. Let us unpack this dynamic together, you and I, because the psychological tension is staggering. Maeve has just delivered a brutal reality check, and Adrian has no choice but to swallow his bruised pride. He murmurs a quiet agreement, gripping the wheel and treating the city grid like a massive chessboard. He is not navigating toward a safe house. He is merely keeping the machine moving, mirroring the survival instincts of his father. Suddenly, his phone shatters the silence. Luca is on the line with grim intelligence. Half of their pursuers have vanished, but the vehicles still riding their bumper belong to the corrupt senator. 4 heavy guns are actively hunting them. It illustrates a vital rule. When the world burns around you, relentless momentum is often the only thing keeping you alive. The crisis is escalating rapidly. Luca's voice bleeds panic through the speaker, revealing that Marco identified Danny Rohr in the lead pursuit vehicle. Danny is a legendary monster, a merciless hitman on the senator's dirty payroll. Marco also breached Maeve's apartment, finding an absolute void. Adrian stares coldly at the street ahead, then delivers a masterful shock. He reveals that Maeve is sitting right beside him, deliberately keeping his oldest friend in the dark to shield him from the fallout. Then, Adrian issues a scorched earth directive. Call the estate and permanently cancel the extravagant mafia wedding. It teaches us a difficult truth. Sometimes, to truly survive, you must be willing to strike the match yourself and watch your former life burn to ashes. The suffocating silence that follows carries the weight of a collapsing empire. Luca warns that canceling the venue guarantees the vendors will talk, transforming this betrayal into a public spectacle. Adrian remains entirely unmoved. He coldly decrees that the wedding died the previous night.
He is
The death certificate. As he terminates the call, Maeve instantly dissects his ruthless strategy. By making this cancellation a public scandal, Adrian is directly humiliating Banks and proving the marriage was a hollow political scam. More importantly, it arms the vengeful Charlotte with endless motivation to leak syndicate secrets. It is a harsh reality to swallow, but occasionally, you have to set your own house on fire just to expose the rats hiding in the walls. Adrian knows Charlotte has enough venom to dismantle her father's syndicate. He notes a profound truth. While fiery anger eventually burns out, the cold stain of humiliation lasts a lifetime. He takes no joy in this mental chess, but Maeve is fascinated. She admits she would always choose a man who owns his ruthlessness over a false hero pretending his hands are clean. Then, Adrian unveils a crucial piece of the puzzle. His aunt finally confessed the truth about the hidden document Maeve's grandfather unearthed decades ago. The old man buried the reality to shield Adrian's father from the crossfire. It is a tragic irony of the human condition. The heavy secrets we bury to protect the people we love are often the exact things that inevitably destroy them. This is a turning point, and you and I need to examine it closely. Idling under a red light, Adrian reveals the true nature of this phantom document. It was a sprawling, meticulously maintained mafia ledger. We are looking at an intricate web of illicit transfers from 1998 to 2002, funneling directly to New York's top federal prosecutor. Banks was the invisible architect, laundering dirty syndicate cash through legitimate political donors. He literally purchased a sitting prosecutor to assassinate 3 federal investigations into racketeering. The sheer scale of the corruption is sickening, but it leaves us with an undeniable lesson. No matter how deeply a man tries to bury his sins, arrogant greed will always leave a paper trail. The narrative descends into darker territory here. 2 of those strangled federal investigations were targeting the Vecco crime family. Adrian shatters the illusion of innocence, revealing that Maeve's grandfather was never a passive observer. His true function was managing this illegal financial artery alongside Banks. He was the literal gear turning the dirty money machine. The catastrophe occurred when the old man stumbled upon the master ledger, finding the records of every corrupt judge and politician had purchased since 1991. It serves as a haunting reality check for anyone tempted by the shadows. When you willingly step into the dark to execute a monster's dirty work, you are guaranteed to eventually uncover his most terrifying nightmares. We are looking at a decade of systemic federal corruption distilled into a single explosive document. The dirty prosecutor hoarded it as an insurance policy, but Maeve's grandfather extracted it. He duplicated the files, burned the details into his memory, and delivered it to Adrian's father. In that moment, Adrian's father understood that Cassian Voss had instantly become the most hunted man in New York City. Banks would scorch the earth to ensure those pages never saw the light of day. To preserve his friend's life, Adrian's father entirely erased Cassian's existence. He looked a bloodthirsty syndicate boss directly in the eyes and swore the man was already a corpse. It demonstrates that sometimes the absolute purest acts of loyalty demand that we speak the most unforgivable lies. While Banks accepted the lie, his deep paranoia kept him hunting for 22 years. Adrian steers the vehicle into the shadows of an empty parking structure and kills the engine. He maps out the reality. Banks is spiraling into panic because his daughter's engagement was vaporized by a random waitress who possesses the syndicate's darkest secrets. A mastermind like Banks knows the universe does not deal in coincidences. Maeve remains completely still in the suffocating quiet of the car, her mind frantically assembling the pieces of her shattered reality. Adrian honors her process, letting the heavy silence stretch. It is a vital lesson. Interrupting someone while they are quietly constructing their survival strategy will always cost you far more than it could ever buy. Let us appreciate the terrifying architecture of this standoff. Maeve drops a staggering revelation. The syndicate boss has no idea the physical ledger exists. He simply suspects her grandfather is still drawing breath. Adrian's response is merciless. He reminds her that a whisper of suspicion was enough to dispatch killers to her doorstep at dawn. This ruthless architect spent 22 years constructing an ironclad criminal empire just to bury this specific ghost. Now the clock is bleeding out. They have perhaps 20 minutes before Luca and his enforcers shatter the sanctuary of the garage. It is a chilling reminder of how the world truly works. Willfully ignoring your deepest problems never makes them vanish. It simply grants them the time they need to evolve into absolute monsters. The shadows in the car seem to press in on them as Adrian locks eyes with Maeve, laying out a final, desperate ultimatum. He warns her that their window for survival is closing fast, and he needs the raw truth, the kind of truth only her grandfather can verify. This is the precise second she sheds the innocent waitress persona like a heavy coat. Beneath that disguise is a deeply exhausted woman, someone who has hauled the crushing weight of a family vendetta for her entire existence. When Adrian demands to know if she has actual, physical proof to tear the syndicate apart in federal court, she does not even blink before saying yes. We often think courage looks like the absence of fear, but more often it is just being so thoroughly tired of running that you finally plant your feet and strike back. Facing his relentless questions, Maeve reaches into her pocket and produces a single key, presenting it as if it holds the weight of the world. She confesses there is a hidden safe deposit box in Yonkers, registered to a ghost. The contents are pure leverage, a digital drive of blackmail, alongside 2 physical pages her grandfather tore from a ledger, enough to bury a corrupt judge forever. The paper is authentic, the ink can be dated, and it is the definitive end for the crime bosses. Yet, the real shock comes when Adrian learns this box has sat untouched for 14 years. Stick with me here, because we are about to unpack a profound truth. The most explosive, dangerous secrets we carry are almost always the ones we bury in the dark, pretending they no longer have power over us. The history behind this key reveals the dark cycle of trauma within the Mafia. Her grandfather opened that vault when she was only 15, warning her that the contents would either save their bloodline or erase them from the earth entirely. He left her with one sacred rule. She could never open it unless a member of the Vaco family was by her side. Hearing this, Adrian sits in stunned silence, feeling the suffocating legacy of his own name. But Maeve clarifies that she had to wait for the right Vaco. She knew it was him the moment she mentioned the name and saw him nearly collapse from the agony of his past. It is a stunning revelation. Trust is the heaviest burden a person can carry, but genuine loyalty means protecting that trust, no matter the pain, until the exact right moment arrives. Maeve finally asks the question that has been hanging between them: is he truly the right Vaco? Adrian lets the quiet stretch out, refusing to offer a hollow promise just to make her feel better. With a voice thick from unhealed grief, he admits he might actually be the very last Vaco left alive in this brutal turf war. Before the reality of that tragic admission can even settle, her phone lights up. It is Felix, and he is terrified. The syndicate tail cars are moving aggressively toward Manhattan Avenue, the exact neighborhood where her grandfather is hiding. The tension in the car spikes instantly, shifting from quiet reflection to pure panic. We often learn the hard way that life rarely gives you the time to figure out who you are before throwing you into the fire. You just have to brace yourself and fight. Adrian shifts into a tactical mindset, asking if banks notice their exit. Felix then reveals an unsettling detail. There is a third vehicle, not a tinted SUV, but a white catering van waiting quietly since midnight. Adrian connects the dots instantly. This is not surveillance. It is an extraction. He slams the car into gear. explaining that the syndicate is not just hunting her grandfather. They are bringing someone familiar to coax him out of the shadows, weaponizing his trust against him. He turns to Maeve and says the name that changes everything. Charlotte. It is a harsh reality to accept, but the most devastating traps in life are almost never set by strangers. They are built by the familiar faces we leave our front doors unlocked for. Maeve is visibly shaken, convinced that Charlotte is actively participating in the scheme. But Adrian calmly dissects the ruthless logic of the syndicate. Banks does not need his daughter to know the actual plan. He only needs her angry enough to call her rival, which would unknowingly broadcast the grandfather's exact location. Her father handed her a loaded weapon disguised as a phone number, fully expecting her blind anger to pull the trigger. Right on cue, Adrian's phone illuminates with Charlotte's name. When she speaks, her normally composed voice is entirely shattered. She is sobbing, repeating that her father lied to her. It is a striking reminder that holding on to unchecked rage simply makes you an easy puppet, allowing others to turn your own deepest pain into a weapon against you. You and I are going to look at this together, because Charlotte has just had her entire understanding of reality destroyed. Her own father sat across from her and coldly confessed that her upcoming wedding had nothing to do with love. It was entirely about securing power within the syndicate. She was never a beloved daughter to him. She was just a strategic piece on his chessboard. He had given her that mysterious phone number, promising the man answering all the recent drama would explain away all recent. Her voice shatters as she admits she was seconds away from making that fatal call. The psychology here is devastating. Sometimes the most painful truth a person can swallow is realizing that the very people sworn to protect your heart are the ones quietly scheming to trade it away. Maeve sits frozen as Adrian reveals the terrifying scope of the manipulation. He tells Charlotte her grand engagement was nothing more than an elaborate distraction designed by her father to keep Adrian chasing shadows for 4 years. When a heartbroken Charlotte asks what this waitress could have possibly done to deserve such a cruel setup, Adrian delivers a chilling truth. He tells her that Maeve did absolutely nothing. Every single sin belongs to her grandfather, buried in the dark soil of their family tree. He strictly orders Charlotte to never dial that number, knowing it is a death trap. It highlights a tragic reality. We frequently find ourselves forced to pay off toxic debts we never asked for, simply because of the unresolved history handed down by the generations before us. The silence that follows is heavy, as Charlotte absorbs the absolute betrayal of her own father. If she refuses to play her assigned role, the syndicate will sever her from her old life completely. But Adrian does not give her time to spiral. He shifts into a commanding authority, issuing rapid orders. He tells her to grab her passport, abandon her phone, and run immediately to a safe house in Carroll Gardens. When she weakly asks what exactly she is running from, Adrian delivers a sobering reality. She has to hide from whatever ruthless move her father makes next. It is a brutal breaking point for her character. Sometimes, you have to find the strength to burn the bridge to your own family tree to stop the fire from completely consuming your future. Adrian lets that grim reality settle over the line, the quiet hum of the engine in the background. Charlotte eventually whispers, a broken note of agreement, entirely stripped of her usual arrogance. Adrian ends the call, only to find Maeve staring at him in utter disbelief. She reminds him this is the same erratic woman who recently shattered a wine glass near her face. Yet he is orchestrating her rescue. But Adrian operates on a level of cold, tactical brilliance. He understands that removing Charlotte from the board denies her father his most useful weapon. earning them the one resource they desperately lack: time. True power is rarely about destroying every person who wrongs you. It is about learning how to flip your opponent's pieces to win the larger game. Adrian keeps his eyes locked on the pavement, swearing he is not rescuing Charlotte out of lingering emotional attachment. He frames it purely as strategic math aligning with basic decency. Maeve looks out the window, murmuring that her grandfather would have deeply respected his approach. She shares a piece of wisdom the old man once taught her. Choosing the moral high ground only when it benefits you does not make you righteous. It just makes you a clever opportunist. Genuine integrity only reveals itself when doing the right thing actually costs you something painful. It is a sobering reminder for us all. The true danger in life is not when your plans collapse. It is when you get exactly what you want and suddenly realize you are not strong enough to carry the weight. Adrian answers with an ironclad certainty, stating he has been preparing for this burden for 2 agonizing years. Beside him, Maeve looks down at the small key pressing into her palm, an object holding 2 decades of suffocating paranoia. They must race to Yonkers before Senator Banks discovers the deposit box exists. Banks has spent 20 years chasing a phantom, unaware the files were buried under the name of a woman who died in 1987. Let's unpack this together, because it reveals a harsh, undeniable truth. No matter how deep you bury your darkest skeletons, the earth will eventually spit them back up. If Banks reaches her grandfather first, physical pain will pry every secret loose. Without blinking, Adrian demands the exact address. Maeve sits trembling. Tucked inside her bag is a faded photograph. For 22 years, Maeve has dragged a dead man's reputation around like an anchor. Now, she sits in a car with the son of the boss who forged that original blood pact. Outside, the October sun slices through the fog. Follow me closely here, because this is the exact moment the narrative fractures. Maeve finally speaks the route aloud. A 41-minute sprint straight into the heart of their vendetta. Adrian handles the wheel with the terrifying calm of a man who has already lost everything. He understands a vital lesson here. Surviving the storm with a clear head is always more critical than rushing blindly toward the finish line. As the gritty city fades into quiet suburbs, we see that your time in the shadows will always expire. You and I have probably noticed how silence builds tension before a storm. The car tears down the dark road in absolute quiet, but this is not awkward. It is the heavy, exhausting stillness of 2 people hoarding their energy for the massive collision ahead. Maeve's grandfather is tucked away in Yonkers, shielded by an old electrician named George. He served with him in 1968, guarding a lethal secret for 11 years without asking a single question. There is a profound truth hidden here. True loyalty does not demand an explanation. It simply hands over the keys to the safe house. This shadow network was crafted by a fixer named Felix, a master who refuses the spotlight. The most dangerous players on the board always understand the absolute power of remaining entirely invisible. Maeve grabs the burner phone. After 3 rings, the gravelly voice she has loved since childhood answers. She tells her grandfather they are 40 minutes out, and she is bringing Adrian. A fragile, exhausted laugh echoes through the speaker. He whispers that her father was absolutely right about her, trusting she would know exactly when to pull the trigger. Maeve replies quietly that she did not pick this moment. The moment picked her. And honestly, well, looking closely at how our lives unfold, that is exactly how it works. We rarely get the luxury of scheduling our biggest battles. We just have to find the nerve to step up when fate kicks down our door. The old man pauses, asking if Adrian is truly his father's son. Watching Adrian's cold grip on the steering wheel, she confirms that he is. Maeve whispers that she thinks he might actually be better. The silence hanging on the line grows so heavy you could slice it open until her grandfather finally yields. He survived 22 grueling years in the shadows. He can hold out for 40 more minutes. Maeve ends the call. Adrian keeps his eyes on the road and admits he heard every word. He points out the sheer weight of her claim, calling him an upgrade over the legendary boss who raised him after knowing him for barely a day. But Maeve does not flinch. Her grandfather taught her how to scan a person's core in mere seconds. There is a gritty survival rule buried here. Taking your sweet time to decide if someone is toxic is a total luxury. It is a privilege meant only for those who can afford the brutal, punishing cost of being wrong. Maeve delivers a devastating psychological blow, coldly admitting she has been tracking his every move for 11 straight months. Yesterday was simply the day he noticed. Adrian absorbs this heavy truth without a change in expression, keeping the car perfectly steady. Exactly at the 40-minute mark, his phone vibrates against the console. It is a text from Luca. When a high-level enforcer resorts to texting instead of calling, the intelligence is too explosive to speak aloud. Adrian tosses the device to Maeve, and the screen reveals pure chaos. Senator Banks is spiraling, frantically dialing shadow lawyers. Stick with me here, because this is a rock-solid law of human nature. When a massive predator suddenly screams for backup, the hunter is now the prey. Maeve reads the glowing screen, and her blood runs entirely cold. Banks did not just call a random beat cop. He dialed a hand-picked, heavy-hitting deputy prosecutor. Luca's intelligence reveals a sickening web of institutional decay. This prosecutor only secured his position 18 months ago because Banks destroyed the previous official with a fabricated scandal. Adrian's voice drops to 0 degrees as he realizes Banks owns this man completely. The corrupt senator is trying to outrun physical evidence by launching a fake parallel investigation purely to lock the real proof inside a vault of classified files. This is a massive wake-up call. The greatest threat to justice is never the average street thug breaking windows. The true villain is the man in the custom suit who literally buys the scales used to weigh the truth. Adrian grips the steering wheel until his knuckles turn bone white. Banks is moving at lightning speed because, for the first time in his miserable life, the man is absolutely terrified. But you and I both know how this psychological game plays out. A cornered boss with endless resources is the most dangerous monster on the board. Fear forces a person to act, and decisions made in pure survival mode are brutally effective. Adrian rips a sharp right turn with only 3 minutes to spare. They roll onto a street that is wonderfully, boringly average. The safe house is a basic home with cheap siding and a rusted fence. Her grandfather knew the ultimate cheat code. If you want to vanish from a world hunting you, you never hide in a dark cave. You hide right in the blinding, mundane light of everyday life. Maeve's voice hardens into straight iron as she tells Adrian he needs to understand exactly who is waiting inside. He is 81 years old. For 22 years, he threw away his personal freedom simply to guard a single document. He is not some disposable chess piece on a mafia board. He is her grandfather, and the very reason she can stare down crime bosses without blinking. She demands that Adrian treat him like a human being, not a convenient shortcut to victory. Adrian locks eyes with her, offering a silent, rock-solid promise before the door swings open. Inside, Cassian Voss sits in the dark kitchen like a fading ghost, while George holds the door in total silence. We all know how tempting it is to use people as stepping stones, but genuine strength only begins the second you decide to respect their humanity first. Cassian is 81, and you can see the brutal weight of every year etched into his posture. His hair is bone white, and his hands look like faded maps of a forgotten war. His shoulders are slumped, crushed by a 2-decade vendetta. But the exact second he looks up, the illusion of weakness vanishes. His eyes are a lethal, piercing green, perfectly matching Maeve's. They lock onto Adrian with the terrifying sharpness of an apex predator. Adrian freezes. He never imagined this meeting, because in the underworld, expectations get you killed. Yet this frail old man feels wildly familiar. I mean, it is not the weathered skin. It is the commanding aura radiating from his bones. Time will eventually break down all our physical bodies, but the fierce, unyielding fire of a true protector never actually fades. Picture the tension in this room. Cassian sits there, radiating the energy of a man who has outlasted his enemies. He spent decades surviving mafia backrooms where breathing at the wrong rhythm can get you killed. He knows exactly how to make a long pause hit like a freight train. For Adrian, this suffocating silence drags up deep trauma regarding his own father. Adrian pulls a chair out and sits across from this living ghost. Cassian just stares him down, letting the quiet stretch out. When the old man finally speaks, his voice is raspy but completely solid. He tells Adrian he has his mother's face, but his father's dead-eyed stare. Adrian chokes back the emotion, whispering that he knows. It shows us something profound. We never truly lose the people who raised us, because we carry their exact legacy in our own reflections. Cassian shatters the tension by dropping a massive truth. He tells Adrian that, despite the vicious rumors and the body count, his father was an honorable man. He walked through absolute hell, hiding Cassian's family for 22 years. The most remarkable part of that sacrifice? He has openly weeping now. Cassian is openly weeping now, apologizing for missing the funeral. Adrian stares at the table, his chest tightening, and whispers that his father would have understood. Then Cassian grabs Maeve's hands, beaming with the fierce pride of a grandfather. He tells her she followed the survival plan perfectly. True loyalty is always found in these quiet, unseen sacrifices. It teaches us that the absolute greatest gifts we leave behind are the ones nobody could ever repay. Let's pause and look at this together. Cassian cracks a warm smile, bragging about how Maeve executed every instruction perfectly. Down to the Thursday schedules, he shares a piece of underworld wisdom. Men who bind themselves to strict routines become incredibly easy to predict, and Adrian's father was exactly that kind of man. Adrian feels the sharp sting of that truth, but they have no time for memory lane. He snaps back into a calculated state, warning Cassian that Banks contacted a corrupt prosecutor 40 minutes ago. Their escape window is rapidly closing. Cassian just nods, his demeanor entirely calm. He looks like a man who has waited for death for 2 decades and finally made his peace. We can spend our entire lives running from our demons, but real peace only arrives when we stop, plant our feet, and face our fate head-on. The room instantly freezes over. Adrian gets straight to business, demanding the raw facts on the hidden document. He needs the lethal secrets she does not know yet. Cassian lets out a heavy, rattling sigh and admits that Maeve told the truth, but there is one massive detail. Well, one dangerous detail. He kept buried. Maeve whips her head around, her expression painted with sudden betrayal. Cassian apologizes softly, explaining he hid this fact so she would not be crushed by the psychological weight while walking into the fire. Then Cassian locks eyes with Adrian, his gaze turning deadly serious. He reveals that the prosecutor who hid the file was Arthur Greer, using it as his ultimate insurance policy against the syndicate. The absolute heaviest burdens we carry are the toxic secrets we force ourselves to swallow. just to protect the innocent people we love the most. Cassian shatters the silence with a revelation that rewrites the entire narrative. Arthur Greer passed away in 2019, but right before his heart stopped, he sent a ghost from the grave, a package to a high-end Philadelphia law firm. Inside sits a single key to a vault holding verified, career-destroying documents from 2001, and the letter? It was addressed exclusively to Adrian. The kitchen air grows thick, almost unbreathable. Adrian freezes entirely, his face a perfect, unreadable mask, though his white-knuckled grip on the table betrays the seismic shock rattling his bones. It is a brilliant illustration of a universal truth. The past never stays buried, it merely rests in the dark, universe patiently waiting for the perfect moment to step back into the light. Reeling from this revelation, Adrian maintains his icy composure, asking if Greer specifically chose him. Cassian shakes his head. Greer only knew the legend of Adrian's father. He sent the weapon to the head of the Vecco syndicate, wagering that whoever inherited the empire would know exactly how to wield it. Cassian locks eyes with the younger boss, explaining that Calloway and Associates have guarded this secret for 6 years, waiting in the shadows because a direct approach would trigger a bloodbath. You and I see this in every great tragedy, right? True inheritance is rarely about wealth or luxury. More often, it is simply taking ownership of the bloodstained ledgers and unfinished wars of the broken men who came before you. Pulling out his phone, Adrian searches the first name. The crushing irony forces him to slam the device onto the table. He actually hired these exact lawyers in 2021 for routine paperwork. Cassian softly confirms the absurdity. They sat right across from Adrian, silently holding the key to his destiny. How did they keep quiet? Cassian explains the paralyzing grip of legal privilege. Greer demanded they test the young heir first, waiting to see if he possessed the cold ruthlessness required to shoulder his father's violent legacy before handing over the weapon. It forces us to confront a profound reality. The most defining tests of our character do not arrive with trumpets. They happen in the quiet, mundane moments when we believe absolutely no one is watching. Cassian reveals they have been waiting for this exact convergence of events. Adrian needs exactly 4 seconds to process the magnitude of this betrayal. By the 5th second, the young boss transforms into a terrifying force of nature. He snatches his phone, dialing a number entirely from memory. When a polite voice answers, Adrian's tone drops to absolute zero, demanding the manager of the Greer estate. He drops the hammer without hesitation, stating he knows everything about the 2019 package. A suffocating silence swallows the line. 45 agonizing seconds bleed away before Philip Calloway finally answers, sounding like a man who reached the end of a long, dark road. Let this be a reminder. When uncertainty paralyzes your world, the only true cure is unapologetic action. Shaken, Calloway admits he did not expect this call so soon. Adrian coldly replies that the timeline has accelerated, surrendering to the inevitable. Calloway outlines the arsenal. 37 verified documents, 11 confessions, and 4 pages proving Senator Banks accepted massive corrupt payouts in the 90s. Experts validated every signature, constructing an inescapable trap. But then Calloway introduces a fatal complication. His voice trembles as he reveals that a corrupt deputy named Kevin Marsh called 40 minutes ago, ruthlessly hunting for Greer's buried files. The board is descending into total chaos. It proves a terrifying law of nature. When a massive dam of buried secrets finally fractures, you must brace yourself. The dark water will flood in from every possible direction at once. Adrian snaps, his voice cutting like glass, demanding to know exactly what they told this deputy. Calloway stammers. They played the standard legal defense, claiming privilege, but Marsh threatened to secure a warrant before sunset. Adrian glances at Cassian, who sits motionless like an ancient statue, while Maeve remains paralyzed by the terror. Without a blink, Adrian executes a masterclass in power dynamics. He orders the lawyer to bypass local authorities entirely and contact the FBI in New York within 30 minutes. They are to declare explosive proof of corruption and expose a rogue prosecutor attempting to destroy evidence. If you cannot politely play their broken rules, you cannot politely play by their broken rules. You have to step up, smash the table, and flip the entire board. The lawyer chokes on his breath, warning the young boss that involving federal agents is a nuclear escalation. Ice flows through Adrian's veins as he cuts him off, stating he understands the gravity perfectly. Arthur Greer trusted his bloodline to finish this war, and his family honors its debts. Defeated, Calloway hangs up to make the call. The kitchen plunges back into a heavy silence, punctuated only by the meaningless hum of a morning news broadcast. Maeve whispers that Banks will discover the trap in an hour. Adrian is already rapid-firing texts to Luca, calculating a 50-minute window before the senator sends his hitmen. Stick with me here, because this is fascinating. The absolute most devastating wars are often silently declared in the quietest, most ordinary living rooms. Adrian locks his gaze onto Cassian, searching for a blind spot in a brutal landscape where enemies are always watching. He asks if there is anywhere off the grid that Banks cannot track down. A slow, exhausted smile creeps across Cassian's face. It is the expression of an aging chess master who has played in the dark for decades and is finally watching his trap spring shut. The old man mentions an obscure relative in Connecticut, promising to personally deliver Maeve to safety. But Adrian slices through the tension, delivering a hard refusal that echoes like a gavel strike. You and I know this exact spine-chilling moment. It is that crucial second where you finally stop running, dig your heels into the dirt, and turn around to face the dark. Maeve is staying right here with me, Adrian declares, dropping an absolute bombshell. He is intentionally offering himself as bait. He needs the senator's eyes glued to the front of the board while the federal agents dismantle his empire from behind. His eyes look hollow as he swears he is not the true weapon. He believes he is merely a shadow standing beside the real power, exactly like his father. But Cassian peers at this young man, seeing the tragic ghost of a dead patriarch, and delivers a crushing truth. He reveals that Adrian's father held that exact same flawed belief. It teaches us a beautiful lesson about perspective. Often, the people who view themselves as mere background characters are actually the vital pillars holding the entire world together. Cassian leans forward, bearing the invisible weight of a dozen forgotten mafia wars. He delivers a profound realization. A man who risks his own empire to protect something genuine is not merely standing next to power. He is the power. The old man strikes the table with a trembling hand, radiating iron will. He whispers that Adrian's father made a blood promise, and Adrian blindly honored that sacred debt. The gravity of this legacy hits Adrian like a physical blow. Slowly, he places his hand over Cassian's weathered fingers. The room descends into a rich, reverent silence then, and for the first time in 2 years, the ache in her chest fades. Here is the quiet truth. Genuine loyalty never dies when people do. It simply takes root in the heart of the next generation. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? The psychology operating here is fascinating. Maeve cannot fully relax yet, knowing a monster like Banks is still breathing, but she finally experiences the profound relief of dropping a dark secret she dragged around in total isolation. You and I know how poisonous it becomes when you bury your trauma. Now, she finally has a circle. Suddenly, the peace shatters as her phone vibrates with a text from Felix. The ominous white van on Greenpoint Avenue is driving toward the Manhattan Bridge. Adrian bolts upright, reading the tactical shift. The senator is pulling his thugs back. Banks might not know who cracking beneath his feet, but he feels the ice cracking beneath his feet, slowly. Adrian turns and locks eyes with Maeve. Adrian warns her the senator is regrouping, granting them a razor-thin window to strike. Maeve turns to her grandfather. Cassian looks like a fragile man who just survived a 20-year marathon. He is completely drained, having finally surrendered a massive psychological burden. His voice is a dry rasp as he commands them to go finish the war. Maeve promises to call, and he reaches up, his trembling fingers brushing her cheek. He confesses she is better than he ever deserved. He tries to say her father would have been proud, but his voice breaks, crushed by the grief of losing his son to a ruthless syndicate game. Sometimes the most profound lesson a person can learn is knowing when to step back, yielding the floor so the next generation can fight the battles we no longer can. Today, you and I are going to unpack the quiet moments before a storm. Cassian swallows his grief, forcing his breath into a steady rhythm. He tells Maeve her father would be endlessly proud of her. She squeezes his hand for a fragile second before snatching her bag and rushing into the biting morning air, Adrian shadowing her steps. Back inside, George sits beside his exhausted friend in absolute silence. True companionship rarely needs a script. Simply being there is often enough. Outside, Adrian's phone shatters the cold quiet. It is an unknown 212 number. A clinical voice introduces herself as Special Agent Diana Rice with the FBI. The hidden documents have finally brought the authorities to their door. Agent Rice coldly notes that Adrian holds the missing context for these massive leaks. Adrian responds with an unwavering rumble, confirming he is exactly the man she needs. She demands they meet at Federal Plaza in 1 hour, and he agrees without a single hesitation. Ending the call, he looks at Maeve across the frost-covered car, delivering the heavy news. The gravity of the moment anchors them. Adrian warns they must strike now. Senator Banks is shielded by a fortress of dirty money and corrupt politicians. Delaying even a day means losing it all. He holds her gaze, asking if she is truly prepared. Every monumental choice demands a sacrifice, reminding us that you can rarely dismantle a corrupt system without sacrificing your own comfortable sanctuary in the process. Maeve refuses to flinch. She reminds Adrian that her grandfather existed as a ghost for 22 years, and her mother died without ever reclaiming her real name. Running from your past only guarantees it will dictate your future. Her voice is unsettlingly calm, but anyone watching closely recognizes the kind of hollow calm that costs pieces of your soul to maintain. She declares she did not come to New York to hide. She came to sever the roots of this mafia war. Adrian absorbs her defiance, promising they will end the cycle today. 40 minutes into their drive, Luca calls with a massive update. The foundation is cracking. Senator Banks is bleeding out in the press, dodging frantic calls, while his panicked lawyers rush to contain the unfolding disaster. Luca confirms Charlotte is securely hidden at Rosa's home. Rosa moves through the kitchen, brewing tea, acting as an impenetrable vault, refusing to utter a word about the violence of the previous night. Luca is struck by the quiet dignity of her loyalty. 50 minutes into the drive, the first massive domino falls. The United States Attorney abruptly resigns without warning. Charlotte sends Adrian the news clip, recognizing the blood in the water. Her message is brief. You were right. Adrian leaves it unanswered, letting the silence linger. At Federal Plaza, Agent Rice waits with an unbothered, freezing demeanor. She embodies the ultimate apex predator, teaching us that the most terrifying weapon you can deploy against a frantic enemy is often pure, unyielding patience. Agent Rice does not arrive alone. She is flanked by two silent agents in an oppressively bright conference room. Rice dissects Adrian the moment he sits, then turns her surgical gaze toward Maeve. With deliberate care, Maeve drops a tiny jagged key onto the polished table. Rice stares at the metal-lock mask, her expression a blank mask, before calmly naming the specific safe deposit box in Yonkers. Maeve confirms the location, revealing the final blow. The box holds the original ledgers, a secured drive, and a sworn confession from Cassian Voss, detailing decades of blood money. Maeve's voice trembles as she reveals the document was written in 2018. It beautifully illustrates that raw, unvarnished truth required, the only explosive required to level a corrupt empire. Maeve explains Cassian spent 4 agonizing years waiting to testify, trapped by the certainty that speaking out meant a death sentence for his family. Rice studies her, asking softly how long she has carried the crushing weight of this secret. Maeve's mind drifts to a rusty fire escape, shattered glass, and a faded photograph from the last innocent summer before her reality fractured. She meets the agent's eyes and whispers that it has been her entire life. Rice simply nods. She offers no cheap sympathy, which is precisely the respect Maeve deserves. We must remember that empty pity never solves our deepest problems. Only calculated action does. Uncapping her pen, Rice flips open the file, looking like a cold-blooded surgeon preparing to finally excise a terminal illness. Rice whispers to let them begin, and the pillars of a criminal empire shatter. 3 hours later, Senator Banks is marched out of his sprawling townhouse by federal agents. They brandish warrants so ironclad that his high-priced legal team immediately retreats. Banks remains entirely mute as he is dragged into the harsh daylight. He spent 4 decades curating a pristine public mask, yet now his expression is a chilling blank slate. Stick with me here, because this reaction is deeply psychological. An innocent person rarely looks that comfortably numb when the authorities arrive. The truth is, only a master deceiver, someone carrying a lifetime of hidden guilt, adopts that dead-eyed vacancy the exact moment their fabricated universe finally crumbles to dust. From the safety of Rose's warm living room, Charlotte watches the spectacle unfold on live television. She is curled into an armchair steeped in the scent of simmering tomatoes and genuine domestic peace. As the breaking news flashes, a profound numbness washes over her. It is not sorrow, nor is it vindication. It is the deafening silence that arrives when you realize your entire upbringing was subsidized by violence. Waking up 26 to find your history was an elaborate fiction is devastating. Yet standing on painful truth is always better than resting comfortably on a lie. Rosa offers no empty platitudes. She simply places another steaming cup of tea on the table, allowing the heavy, long-held shadows of their shared history to finally settle into the earth for good.